We're going to get started here in a few moments, everybody. I'm going to let a couple more people join in, and then we'll get rolling. All right, so hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on Good Apple's Modern Data Stack. I know you probably have a lot of things you could be doing, so we really do appreciate you spending the time here with us today. My name is Alex, and I'm going to be moderating today's event. Before we get started, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items. So first of all, this webinar will be recorded, and you'll get an email with the recording tomorrow, so be sure to look out for that. Next here, all attendees are muted, so if you have any questions for us, please put them in the Q&A tab, which can be found at the top right of your screen, and we'll do our best to get those answered for you during the Q&A session. And lastly, we've just shared a data sheet overviewing Rivery, which you can find via the handout tab at the top right corner of your screen. This will be available for you to view and download throughout the duration of this webinar, so be sure to take a look at that. And with that, let's get started. So first, I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. We're joined by Dan Greenberg, Partner Growth and Operations Lead at Rivery, and from Good Apple, Mark Sterno, Director of Analytics, and Jean Huang, Senior Data Analyst. So I'm going to quickly provide an overview of today's agenda before handing it over to Dan to kick things off. So to begin, we'll share an intro to Rivery and discuss marketing analytic trends and common data challenges for agencies. Mark and Jean will then cover Good Apple's data story, including relevant use cases, the business impact, and valuable lessons learned, as well as taking a diver deep into each component of their marketing data stack. We'll then conclude the session with a live Q&A where we'll answer questions submitted via the Q&A tab. And just to reiterate, the Q&A tab is now open and located at the top right of your screen. So please feel free to send those questions through at any time. And I think that's all from me. So at this point, I'd like to hand it over to Dan to begin our main discussion for today.
Thanks, Alex. Before we hop into things, I want to give you all a brief overview of who we are as Rivery. Rivery is a SaaS ELT platform that handles mission-critical aspects of key data processes, including data management, data orchestration, and data automation. As a built-to-cloud offering, the solution is specifically suited to the needs of modern BI and analytics. Rivery is platform agnostic, as it is fully managed and supports all of the main cloud data warehouses on the market. Rivery is also code-free, allowing users to create pipelines with simple point-and-click functionality. Customers enjoy Rivery for many key benefits, but some of the main ones include speed, due to the fact that users can get up and running with data pipelines in the matter of minutes. Simplicity, as native connectors eliminate the need for code or prior skills. Source variety through both support of non-native and native sources, and scalability to support any volume of data. Next, I want to transition into an initial glance of some of the common data challenges faced by digital agencies. First and foremost, data is exploding across channels. Not only are the amount of data sources in this space ever growing, the depth of insights and information across each source is growing. Experts only expect this trend to continue in the coming years. And this ties into my next point around data access and management. With such a vast amount of data to be collected, Excel spreadsheets are no longer suitable for data analysis. Most of these marketing sources have APIs to tap into, but building these connections yourself is time-consuming and takes away from value-added activities. Such trends make it tough for marketers to have self-service access to data without relying on IT. Next comes the client reporting aspect. Digital agencies often have a multitude of different accounts that they are managing, each with their own reporting requirements and timelines. Without a scalable way to connect and analyze data streams, it becomes near impossible to address varied requirements across clients. And lastly, we must discuss resource constraints. While digital agencies may have many clients or accounts, they must ultimately manage these accounts in a cost-effective way, which usually comes down to the chosen tech stack. The build of mission-critical data processes also requires highly skilled employees, which adds another challenging element to consider. And all in all, these challenges require implementation of forward-thinking technology solutions to ultimately deliver high levels of client service. So many distinct data challenges faced by media agencies, a closer look at technology needs is warranted. The first element of technology needs typically starts with consolidating and preparing your data, which is commonly referred to as ETL or more recently ELT. Proper deployment of ELT pipelines can ease the burden in maintaining API connections and shift that time to more value-added tasks. The second key technology need is around data management. A commonly used system to manage data from disparate sources is the data warehouse, which is therefore quite useful for media agencies. Built-to-cloud data warehouse solutions are also consumption-based, which allows agencies to only pay for the compute and storage they need. This ultimately results in efficient and effective data management. The third element in the technology realm centers around flexible reporting. BI solutions should be self-service to empower the data analyst on an ongoing basis. Reporting requirements are constantly evolving for media agencies, which makes the adoption of a self-service front-end tool all the more important to address these evolving needs. Last but not least, consistent support from the data platform vendors is crucial to the success of media agency data initiatives. This is especially true if you are building a data platform from scratch. Aligning with involved technology vendors ensures a best practice deployment of chosen tools, and this involvement is something that should be established early on in a data platform journey. You can aim to get an idea of support practices during a trial or POC period. This next slide is going to present how Rivery at a high level is purpose-built to address the data and technology needs of digital marketers. First off, Rivery comes pre-built with dozens of different marketing and ad-serving API connectors, in addition to giving users the ability to create their own bespoke connectors in a no-code GUI. As such, Rivery takes the burden off of digital marketers to maintain their own API connections. Multi-account or multi-brand management is the second thing worth mentioning here. Rivery gives agencies the ability to pull data from all of their client accounts for a particular source in a single pipeline, which goes a long way in maintaining such pipelines over time. Remember, agencies often have dozens or even hundreds of accounts that they must pull data across. Data transformations are another critical piece of the puzzle. Rivery gives users the ability to build data models downstream across relevant sources, which ultimately delivers further value as opposed to simply ingesting disparate data streams. And lastly, Rivery promotes the concept of a single version of the truth by feeding a commonly used cloud data warehouse in the digital marketing space. At the end of the day, Rivery's value add for digital agencies translates to business value along the lines of operational efficiency, enhanced reporting, and better benchmarking through segmentation across commonly tracked KPIs. Now I'm going to turn it over to the Good Apple team to introduce themselves and take you through their success story. You also see a poll come across the screen that asks about your marketing analytics challenges, so don't hesitate to share your feedback there. Mark, take it away.
Yeah, so as mentioned, I'm Mark Storino. I'm the Director of Analytics here at Good Apple. And just to give everyone a little bit of background about Good Apple and who we are and what we do, Good Apple is an independent marketing agency focused on media planning and buying. We specialize in pharmaceutical, retail, and e-commerce marketing. And while our roots are firmly planted in that digital space, we have evolved over the past decade to be a full-service media agency that really focuses on the concept of measurement first. And so the idea being, we don't want to do it if we can't figure out what the results of it are happening from it. So as our general pitch here, if you're looking for a marketing agency that provides great customer service and is database decision making, you should definitely be including us in any of those sort of discussions. And who we are is obviously core to the conversation ahead, in particular because our company size and independent nature allows us to make decisions quickly, but it also does require us to make them happen very quickly as well. And the other key piece to know about Good Apple is that people really do come first here. That's employees, clients, and all of our partners are also included in this ethos. As to our clients, we really do think of ourselves as an extension of their internal marketing team, with their success really being our success. We still have clients from 2008 when we started, and the vast majority of our growth as a company is due to old clients moving to new companies and bringing us with them. Internally, we have over a 85% employee retention rate, and that's 89% in 2019, which is just a ridiculous number for a marketing agency where the culture of turnover is quite prevalent. And the reason why this is important is that a business of our size needs to focus on its core skills, and measurement, analytics, and media really are core skills, but software development, database management, those are not core skills. We have to figure out ways to not do those sort of things, which kind of brings us to the origin story, so to speak, of today's webinar. In 2015, we had a very data-heavy client that wanted a very, very detailed weekly report. This report, and I kid you not, took 72 hours to create. It was 3 people working full-time, Monday through Wednesday, to put it together. At the time, Good Apple had 21 people. That's just a massive strain on resources and impacts our focus on those core business goals and on the people as well. That's 72 hours of tedious, glorified data entry for employees, and 72 hours of not being focused on working with our client. In 2015, internally, the most common complaint for employees was they were all based on reporting. It caused so many issues across the board. Obviously, this is a massive problem for us. So we recognize that this was not, and still is not, a unique problem in the industry, nor is it an unsolvable problem. My lives prior to Good Apple were really heavy in database marketing with T-SQL shops that had servers in closets or in Arkansas or wherever they were. And those are basically solutions to the same problem we were having. However, we were in a different place than those companies and needed different things. So we listed out those needs, and we focused on the following. Really, we needed flexibility to work across many different systems. At the time, many of these quote-unquote complete systems with pre-built connections were focused on e-commerce, which didn't address all of our needs and therefore really addressed none of them. From my standpoint, a general issue with this type of situation is that you need a system capable of addressing at least 80% of your needs to make it useful. And e-commerce at the time was not 80% of the business. And honestly, a lot of these solutions really didn't solve maybe even 80% of those needs to begin with. Pharma marketing, however, in particular, has a lot of data sources and partners and tools and requirements that didn't and still don't really plug into those systems. And we absolutely needed them to. We were willing to sacrifice a bit of our ease for more flexibility, and we wanted to keep options open for the data import and export. We wanted to have lots of opportunities for that. Coincidentally today, I think with the fracturing of the marketing ecosystem, with Facebook and Google and Amazon and others closing their walls, and the rise of a lot of these new data partners to track retail store visitation and purchase habits, those pre-built systems don't really work that well for retail. And honestly, I think they're struggling a bit with e-commerce now too. So flexibility is probably more important now than it was then. And it was very important for us then. And a key piece to any project like this is going to be automation, right? Everything else is pretty pointless if you can't automate your processes. That's an absolute requirement. For Good Apple, however, this was actually a pretty big concern because we wanted to, again, I'm focusing in on those core businesses. We wanted to keep those in mind. We are a marketing agency, and while we have talented and capable analysts, in fact, I'll pitch again here. I'll put my analytics team against any other analytics team in the space. We have great people, but we needed them focused on analytics, not on sort of building data pipelines. And we definitely didn't want to have to build out a full database team or a DevOps team of that sort. So it would just be too far from that core business, especially as a company with 21 people. So we really needed automation using the team and the resources that we had. And closely aligned with this is that next need. We wanted support along the way. If we were going to have analysts building, maintaining, and operating a data platform, we were going to need support from those that are system experts. Good Apple is focused on people, and we wanted our partners to be equally people-focused. The next need seems silly and kind of obvious at face value, but we needed to provide access to accurate data to everyone at Good Apple. I do believe marketing has an especially big problem with this, but I think most big data systems suffer from some version of this. The more data you have, the more ways you can pull the same metric and get a different answer. There could be a whole conference dedicated to this sort of data disparity. So I'll carry on here assuming that we've all kind of felt this pain at one point or another. However, at Good Apple, a fundamental principle is that every Apple is an analyst. Even our branding director started as an analytics intern. So when you're optimizing media, having a source of truth is key to making good decisions. And often the easiest to access data is not the correct data. Next on this list, scalability. Good Apple was and still is growing. And what I didn't want to do was just solve the 72-hour problem from our origin story. Obviously that needed to get solved, but I didn't want to just solve that one. It was clear that this wasn't a one-off problem, but a sign of things to come. I believe that we were sort of at an inflection point. Old Excel and ad server solutions no longer really worked, and we needed the flexibility of data sources at scale and the ability to expand that scale. Having a lot of data in and of itself is just not a differentiator for any business. Using that data effectively and efficiently definitely is, and that's as true now as it was then, and that's a core value of any good analytics team, really. Lastly, we needed data sets that could answer a wide variety of questions. So what do I mean by this? That's kind of vague, right? Well, we needed granular data that could change date ranges, change groupings, change creative messages, whatever it is that we want to slice and dice our data by. Basically, we needed more dynamic reporting capabilities than we were getting from our compiled static Excel reporting. So what do we do? So I want to start this with today's system. What we did was to build Good Apple's Crisp data integration and management platform. It's a fully cloud-based solution that strives to link the best, most flexible SaaS options into an end-to-end tech stack. Where the services were available, we wanted to use those. We wanted the best in class there. And where they weren't, we did build our own, sometimes against my own principles, but if we need them, right? The concept here is the same as building a stereo system. Probably back in the day, I'm probably dating myself a little bit, but you used to have the option of sort of those all-in-one sort of stereo consoles that had a tape deck, a CD player, maybe a phonograph, and the tuner. You could buy them all as one, or you go out and buy the individual components. We were really looking to go and find those individual components because, much like that stereo system analogy, if you could get each piece that operated really well on its own and that operated well integrated with the other pieces, you ended up with a much better sound, a much better system, because every piece does what it does best. And that's really what we wanted to do. The point is, basically, we wanted to prioritize that flexibility of data imports and what each piece could do, and have each piece be great at what it does. However, we didn't start off with what you see here. We started this whole endeavor on the minimum viable product concept and really grew from there. In simpler terms, we created Crisp not all at once, but on the basis of incrementally improving the system over time in a way that allowed us to use it while continuing to build upon it. Basically, we had an immediate problem to address, which needed to be addressed, but we also didn't want to sacrifice the larger scope and future development in order to do so. So I think it's really illustrative to sort of walk through the different iterations. So the first functional version of Crisp went online in the fall of 2015. I simplified this down to the sort of core parts involved, which we're labeling ETL. Sorry, I'm not using the ELT here. I'm stuck in the old mentality of ETL, integration, and consumption. This isn't the typical way to break this out, nor are these the black and white boxes as they sort of bleed into each other quite a bit. But this is how we think of it internally. ETL is really about that, moving the data from its source to our database. Integration is really where we're combining all those disparate data sets. And then consumption is how the data is presented or used in an ongoing way to clients or for our internal team. And for that first iteration, we started really by finding an integration partner. We started here because this was an obvious upgrade to the previous process of using Excel and pivot tables and whatnot. And with my background in database marketing, it was really the most familiar to me, and therefore I was probably a little biased towards just jumping in here. And we looked at a variety of options, from in-house servers to hosted servers to Hadoop, Redshift, and in the end, we landed quite happily on Snowflake. Snowflake has really been an ongoing success story for us, and it has made it really easy to scale tasks, to integrate sources, store data, and a whole host of other things. At the time when we were exploring options, our Snowflake sales rep told us, with Snowflake, you'll get all the speed, power, and pricing you get with a Redshift, but you'll get it with great service as well. And honestly, I quote that because that's basically what we found. Excellent service, easy configurations, and a pricing structure that worked for us then and still continues today. For the consumption side, we always knew we'd need something better later on, but we made the decision to use Snowflake to create an output file that could plug into the reports already in use. This would basically minimize the impact outside of the analytics team and wouldn't require new processes. However, it left us with the same problems as before. You actually have to have access to the file to see the results, and the reports were static, and they would need to be rerun if you needed new breakouts. There are obviously ways to address both of those issues via SharePoint or Google Sheets, which I don't think was heavily in use at the time, or, and then you add in custom sliders and macros within the Excel notebooks and that sort of stuff. But even today, you'd have a really hard time convincing me that that's a viable solution and not really just a Band-Aid put to sort of solve an immediate problem. The last part here is the ETL option. We opted for using an EC2 node running cron jobs within a Unix machine to call various Python or other scripts to connect to our data sources via APIs or data transfers, what have you. We had hoped that the simplicity of this setup would really let us scale and have a long-term solution, but this just wasn't the case. Long-term managing this with data analysts was just going to be a bad idea. I think maybe exemplified by me once deleting the entire system. It was a very bad day. But support-wise, it had the typical AWS support levels for a company of our size, which is to say we were basically on our own. Most dishearteningly, at least to me, who really believes in simple things as much as possible and the scalability of them, the simple nature here just did not translate to scalability. We were able to keep things running for quite a long time, but we had to come up with solutions as they appeared. Things like our ETL process starting to take longer than 24 hours to update yesterday's data. The new process would kick off before the old one finished and would crash the system. It's an obvious problem. And I'm sure there are ways to address a lot of these issues and to make it work in a longer term manner, but that required support which wasn't there, or people who were really focused in on making sure these systems worked, which is something, again, we wanted to avoid. So in 2017, we get to what I would call the second iteration. Technically, there's a bunch of steps in between, but for simplicity, we'll just say this is it. Snowflake remained as good as always, but what we did was we swapped out the old Excel reports for Looker in 2016 on the consumption side. Here too, we sort of looked at the various options, but Looker was a pretty clear choice for us. Looker's integration with Snowflake was and continues to be pretty seamless, and Looker has a lot of functionality that really worked for us. The way it connects to the full database and not to an abstraction layer, the customization capabilities that you get with LookML, and really its ability to be embedded allows us to build a reporting portal for all of our clients and internal use that allows for excellent user permissioning and control over the data that's out there. So it was a real clear win for us. I'd also like to point out for anyone diving into a project like this, it's worth noting that up until this point, it was very difficult to explain to anyone outside of the analytics group that we had actually done anything. That was really the drawback of using the old Excel reports and just plugging into those that was already there. It was unclear to most of the company and clients that we had actually put any work into this. Looker represented a tangible output and a visual representation of everything that had been created. So the time spent on CRISP and its value internally became much clearer with this step. That's where it started really taking hold. On the ETL side, we pushed the EC2 process as far as we could with a bit of duct tape and some elbow grease, but when we were really able to focus our attention on it after the Looker implementation, we explored a pretty wide range of options, Airflow, Luigi, some SaaS services as well. But in the end, moving to the AWS data pipeline was the lowest effort, highest payoff solution for us. In 2017, we just didn't see the SaaS options as being developed enough for what we were trying to do. And Luigi and Airflow basically were a solid step towards needing those specialized skills to maintain. Over time, we found that the data pipeline was not adequate for the job at hand either. I think it could be an excellent solution for some situations where new connections and updates to the current ones isn't really an ongoing process. But in the end, we found many of the same issues as before. Using it was not that simple, and making edits required, real knowledge of the tool. Plus, the support issue was identical since it was still AWS. And here too, we had real scalability concerns based on our setup. It wasn't so much that it couldn't handle what we were doing, but we had definite concerns about the future viability. And I don't mean to take, like, all this sounds like I'm piling on AWS, as AWS has actually been great for us for a lot of reasons, and it powers a lot of the code that we have written and other aspects of what makes Crisp crisp. But as a plug-and-play service that is easy to maintain, AWS just isn't even designed for that purpose. That's not what its function is, and trying to make it do so just wasn't working for us at all. So if we take a look at where we were in 2019 against those 6 needs, we have a pretty quick summary here. Snowflake and Looker really hitting those boxes, while aspects of AWS falling short, even through 2 different iterations of it. And we were happy with what we had at this point, to be honest. And internally, Crisp was already seen as a success. However, we wanted to be able to do more and to continue to iterate. So we went back to a review process with a much more restrictive view focused on incorporating a SaaS-based ETL tool. They were more on the market and they looked much better than the versions we had seen in 2017. And this, of course, leads us to Rivery. So last fall, the analytics team reached out to 6 or 7 different options, and we tested 4 of them in a live environment. Rivery was a pretty clear winner for us. It was simple and easy to learn. This was, from the testing team, this was the winner because of just how easy it was to use. We got it up and running very quickly, and everyone was pulling reports right away, or transferring data right away. Gene will go more into this, but it's been built out in a way that is simple to understand and easy to build those connections from your data source into your database. The pre-built connectors, in particular, for our ad servers and web analytics tools, were important, if only just for the testing scenarios, because that allowed us to actually have a test in a live environment. And as they've continued to add connectors, it's been nice to see the new connectors for Snap and CRM tools that, just as we are about to need them in a lot of these cases, it's been great. And beyond what is pre-built, the fact that Rivery has really worked with us to add additional connections. This speaks to that service they provide. And that's obviously something I've stressed throughout this. We really need that service to be able to keep these things going and answer our questions. And it also speaks, I think, to the adaptability of the system and how it's growing as Crisp is growing as well. One function that really wasn't on our original list for an ETL partner was data transformation capability. We had planned to do most of this in SQL, but as it turns out, Rivery's data transformation tool is actually quite rad. And while we hadn't planned on using it, it has become a big part of the ETL process. So we definitely love that part. The cost structure, that ends up being one of the biggest factors in our final decision. I hate that this is true, but we all know it is, right? In our review process across ETL partners, pricing was just absolutely the Wild West here. Everyone seemed to have a completely different method for pricing, which made it really difficult to understand what the implications would be. We wanted to know what today's cost would be, but also what it might look like in various scenarios in 2022 and beyond that. This was a difficult part of the process because of the variety in pricing models. In the end, after running through all of the different scenarios we could scrape together, we found a corresponding variety of cost impacts as well, which is something we hoped wouldn't be true. We kind of hoped that they'd all kind of be about the same when it came through to it. But what we saw was that some companies would be great today, but would quickly get out of control, and others quite the opposite, where it just wasn't viable to even think about switching to them right now, and maybe later on it would work. Rivery had a simpler system that actually kind of reminds me of the Snowflake model. You pay for processing power, and as we use more, the cost per usage go down. And while the team saw Rivery as the best tool for the job, I leaned towards it, if only because it had the best pricing model and therefore was going to be the easiest for me to bring to our CFO and to show that what the switch would mean financially for us, and to prove that there could be a positive ROI at the end of the day. And the last point, of course, is scalability. And honestly, all of the ETL partners we looked at were really good as it relates to this. The field is much better than it was in 2017. But even here, given the ease of use and pricing, Rivery is particularly well situated for scaling. And so far, we've been very happy with what we've seen, and it's led us to conversations about really upping the scale and granularity of the data we are bringing in per client for the first time in quite a while. We couldn't even be having those conversations without Rivery on board right now. And so that brings us back to where we are currently. While we expect continued evolution of Crisp and its capabilities, we also expect to see the Rivery Snowflake Looker triumvirate continue to play a big role within it. From a good Apple perspective, we are at a place where we are looking to add additional features and not just upgrading the current parts already in place. And while I would be the first to point out that there are features of Crisp that go beyond what we see in that trio, I would also be the first to point out that you could have a pretty robust reporting and analytics platform that is easy to use and to manage without having a dedicated tech team using just those 3 partners. To understand what it can do for an analytics team in more detail, I'm going to hand this off to Jean to dive into how switching to Rivery has really impacted her work specifically.
Cool. Hi, everyone. I'm Jean, a senior data analyst at Good Apple, and I've been with the company for just about 4 years now. By the time I joined Good Apple, Snowflake and Looker were already implemented, so while I wasn't there for the nightmare of the 72-hour weekly report, there was still a handful of growing pains that kept Crisp from really reaching its final form. So with Crisp, what we're able to do is provide both our clients and internal teams with all the data they need to make informed media decisions, since, as Mark mentioned, we really are a data-driven agency. What does that mean for us? It means bringing in paid media data from our ad server, our search properties, the walled gardens of partners like Facebook and Amazon, programmatic partners, and direct partner buys, as well as any internal reporting that our clients are able and willing to provide, from Google Analytics, Adobe Analytics, Firebase, Salesforce, or Nielsen. So really, there's a lot going on behind the scenes in order for us to be able to perform our best. The ETL process for this was unruly to maintain at the best of times, and with the need to update and add in new sources and connections for different clients as they were introduced, unmanageable, especially when each client needs data from a different combination of sources. However, with Rivery, we're able to consolidate data imports from 14 different types of rivers or different types of sources for all clients into one platform, with each client's needs being managed by their lead analyst. And we're running on average 200 rivers a day in order to provide our clients with all necessary reporting needs. As Mark mentioned, Rivery is also able to accommodate to create connections with new sources as they come in. So it's really become our one-stop shop for all of our data import needs. So even when a client switches their reporting sources in any way, such as switching between analytics platforms, it's exceedingly easy for us to adjust our rivers to pull from an entirely different source without really changing our workflow at all. Another great feature that Rivery provides is the ability to create logic rivers that are able to run our Snowflake SQL queries so that we're really able to use Rivery to seamlessly push the raw data from all of our different sources in Snowflake into that consolidated client-facing view in Looker. The last big advantage that Rivery has been able to offer us is really the democratization of the data process. Where before the data pipeline could only be controlled and managed by 1 or 2 of our data engineers, any of our team of 9 analysts is now able to log into Rivery at any point and rerun the data or restructure a poll for their clients' reporting. Especially now in this time of working from home where everyone can and will work unpredictable hours, it's great to be able to go through the entire process at any time without the need to make sure there's someone on the back end who's available to make the necessary changes. So it's really removed that bottleneck from our workflow. With all of the functionality that Rivery is able to provide, adding it in as part of Crisp has been a huge efficiency driver for us. Some of these points were touched upon throughout this presentation, but the first and most obvious effect for us is really the time saving for all apples. It's not only the data engineering team that's been able to save time with the automation of our core data processes. That time saving really trickles down to the media team executing and optimizing our campaigns as well. Where there used to be a report that took 72 hours to put together every week, which really means spending 3,600 hours a year putting together reporting for a single client. That same report can now be set up in a single 48-hour period and automated to not only be provided weekly, but even refreshed daily so that our reporting is about as real time as possible and can be referenced at any time. We're talking about reducing the time spent on consolidating reporting by a factor of nearly 100. In fact, our most common employee complaint from 2015 about our reporting process are nearly non-existent in 2019, where our biggest complaint is about the snack selection in the office. Clearly, the hours of all of our employees are able to be better spent on tasks that require their expertise rather than busy work. Another factor that's been greatly improved with the addition of Rivery is the speed with which new connections can be integrated into reporting, while still saving resources on our internal team. Our API connection creation and maintenance has essentially been outsourced, freeing up our data engineers to better address other issues. Also, as our business and client roster continues expanding, the connectors are still there without a need to similarly scale our own team. I think I also touched upon this point earlier, but the most immediate effect for me personally is really the democratization of the control over our data processes. As an analyst with very little experience using ETL tools like AWS Pipeline, changing any aspect of the data that was being imported was a back and forth with the internal team to outline the changes, wait for them to have time to address the issue, and then to confirm that everything is working as needed. There's a lot more flexibility now in being able to tinker with things myself without the need to drag others in, saving time by at least 50% and really saving brain space by just as much. So in linking everything together, I think we've learned a couple of valuable lessons for how to get the most out of Rivery and really keep its efficiency. First off, consistency is key, especially when the tool is used across a team of analysts. Many of our data tables are actually agency-wide metrics, so they're shared by everyone, and having a uniform naming convention really helps to smooth out the learning curve for using the tool. Similarly, having guidelines for QAing helps to ensure that all shared data is still ready to use no matter which client has had to be adjusted for. Specifically, in the QA process, we found that diligence in checking through column mapping is especially important in ensuring success. Just from personal experience, we have had cases where running a new report caused some of the report column names to change ever so slightly, which then causes all data past that changed column name to import as nulls, which is basically as destructive as deleting our whole system. So this is obviously, again, related to QA, but it really caused our biggest pain point. So it's worth calling out specifically as a concern for us. Also in the same vein is that our daily data needs, once set up, should really remain unchanged after they're verified to be working properly. While duplicating a river for a one-time run seems inefficient, it really leads to fewer mistakes that could potentially affect the entire database. So this is where we are currently, but Mark will walk us through what the future looks like.
So what's next for Good Apple and Crisp? So as I noted earlier, we're excited to be able to look forward to really increasing the amount of data we are bringing in on an ongoing basis. We have some strategic goals with an eye towards that next listed project that really involves pulling in as much data so that we can look forward to building out cookieless measurement and attribution solutions. That kind of project requires just a scale of data that we have not really wanted to broach up until this point, and now we feel confident enough with Rivery that we'd be able to really plow forward and have that confidence to do what we need to do to make sure we have enough data to do that kind of cookieless attribution methodology. Along with bringing in additional data sources, we'd like to make Crisp a research platform as well. We already have great data sets, but being able to connect with additional data to widen the scope will allow us to use Crisp as a platform for outside information for both our clients and internal use as well. Tapping into a lot of these wide-ranging data sources that in the past we didn't really have great use cases for, hey, let's pull in stock market data, things like that. We could do it, but we didn't really see the need. Now with Rivery, if you have the idea and you think it might be useful, maybe we can start doing it and start doing these kind of projects with it. And lastly, we are beginning a review of sort of SaaS AI partners to plug into our data stack. We have great data scientists, and I would love to give them better tools to be able to dive deeper into our data than before, and to be able to automate some of those results that we get from these processes. And I think some of these SaaS partners really have the capability of doing that. So thinking about Crisp currently being that data management platform, but really starting to look for that eye to the future, and how do we start predicting, and how do we start anticipating what's going to happen next, and have that next evolution of what we're doing. And again, picking that new stereo component as the new technology comes out and adding it to the overall tech stack. So, and with that, I think that's pretty much it for me. I'll hand it back for QA.
All right. So thank you again, Mark, Jean, and Dan. We're going to open it up now for questions and answers. We do have some questions here in the pipeline, but if anyone does have additional questions about Good Apple, Rivery, the presentation today, the Q&A panel at the top right is still open, so feel free to send those through at any time. So getting started here, this first one looks to be for Good Apple, and the question is, what was the process like for building out additional connectors?
So I think that's a good question. I think it's very straightforward too in terms of what it was like for us was basically working with the Rivery team, and they basically say, hey, here's the requirements. You need to give us the URL. You need to give us some of the documentation areas or a contact person within the company that you're trying to connect to, and user credentials to log in so that we can start running some test reports. And ideally, we could also provide some reports that we are currently pulling from them. And that was basically it. We handed that over, and they reviewed it, and then they came back with the timeline, and be it 2 weeks later or what have you. I think the last one we had built, it just went online at the end of last week, and it only took about a week and a half. So very fast, very efficient.
Great. Thank you, Mark. I think this next question here is geared towards you, Dan. The question is, what additional BI tools is Rivery currently examining integrating with? Tableau, SPSS, and SAS seem to be other tools popular in the industry.
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, I think on the BI end, so the main integration focus is definitely towards the data warehouse, and even CDP is something we've explored, but integrating with like Tableau, data extracts has been something that has been discussed as part of our roadmap to basically have that direct sync to the to the front end BI tool of choice. So yeah, I would say cloud warehouses are still the main focus, but BI tools are probably soon to come.
Perfect. And it looks like this next question is for you, Dan, as well. Is there a limit to the number of marketing sources that I can pull from in Rivery?
Yeah, another great question. No real limits. So the full sort of scope of library connectors available to anybody within a Rivery account is always basically at someone's fingertips via point and click. That's really one of the best parts about sort of scaling and growing with Rivery, is that you don't sort of hit against any sort of connector limits if your data needs are to change, let's say in a month from now or 2 months or however long down the road. So yeah, no limits there.
Perfect. So moving along with the pipeline here, next question. Good Apple, how do your clients use the tool? Do they understand the larger benefit of it?
We have various levels of adoption by clients. Internally, it's fully adopted. Everybody just goes to this, to the point that I think we've had some newer employees not even realize that you can get reporting from some of the individual sources that we pull from. From a client perspective, there is pretty good adoption, I would say, on the retail and e-commerce side, where you have very data-hungry people diving in. They're actively involved in working with the dashboards. I would say they're also very involved in day-to-day operations within it. You see them helping, they work with us as we build out those dashboards, and as we put reports out, they have internal needs that they have for their own executive reports, and we'll build dashboards for them to turn into PDFs so they can just float those up easy. And typically they'll have some sort of tracking system where there's some sort of KPI that they're really tracking on a daily basis and following that closely. On the pharma side, it tends to be a little more wide-ranging in terms of they're not in there every day, but we do see the adoption in terms of a weekly cadence where they're going in and really exploring. And as those clients have become much more data savvy and diving into more looking at the media mix, we have a lot more needs where people are really looking into those and spending a lot of time exploring the depth of the data, more so than immediate KPIs, but really doing their own data exploration as well. So we get it from both, and I would say those are the two ways. They definitely are working with us. We typically will have internal company dashboards that the media teams are really focused on, that are at a very detailed level for optimizing a one creative or placement versus another. And then on their level, it's going to maybe show a little bit different, a little more summarized view of things, but still at whatever granularity they need to dive into and aspects of that. So it's, from an adoption level, it's really how we launch with the client. When we show that to them initially, or like right off the bat in our first workings with them, they'll usually take to it, and they'll establish their working pattern with it. So I think that's more just like making it part of the workflow process.
Great. So yeah, I think that probably concludes what we have here. Yep, from a Q&A standpoint. If anybody does still have questions, please reach out to us at contact@rivery.io, and we'd be happy to get you an answer. Additionally, look out for the webinar recording email tomorrow, and we'll be conducting more webinar sessions moving forward. So if there are any subjects, topics, or feedback that you'd like to share with us, please let us know. And yeah, with that, I'd like to thank everyone again for taking the time to join us today. And thank you again to Dan, Mark, and Jean for a great presentation.